This is the official guidebook for Dark Souls 3, and this is a picture of my asshole. Very zoomed in so you can't see anything naughty, but just trust. Published just 18 days after the game was released, this guide was created to help new and struggling players conquer all there was to see in the kingdom of Lothric. Seeing as the game came out in 2016 and not fucking 1999, I think it's safe to assume that not a whole lot of people bought this book. I got mine a few months ago on Amazon for $30, and it is now going for an astounding $12. So I'm a little pissy. But after seeing what Future Press had written in their guides for the other games in the series, I was curious to see what a different author would think as far as what is the most efficient way to beat these games. So today, I, Aqua Sloth, present to you, the audience, beating Dark Souls 3 the way FromSoftware intended. And also Premium Games. Cannonballing straight into this bad boy, the guide opens up with some tips for uncovering the story and lore of Lothric. They say to get a better idea of what's going on, we should speak to any and all NPCs that we find in the Ashen Shrine, watch the intro movie again, read item descriptions for clues, and specifically mentions the descriptions of the keys, and play the rest of the games in the series. In regards to the combat and controls, they say, if you've played games in the series before, you understand what you're getting into. The precision of Dark Souls combat, the need for practice, the reward for mastery, and that feeling that everything you face is tough, but still fair. Trying to keep this in mind, I will do my best to stay as new player-ish as I possibly can, because some of y'all got a little upset in the first one when you saw my epic gamer skills. As far as character creation goes, the guide says to choose the Fire Gem for our Burial Gift for an early damage bonus, but does note that the other viable choices are the Life Ring, Divine Blessing, Hidden Blessing, and Sovereignless Soul. Everything else, kinda sucks. For the starting class, they say to not worry too much about what you choose, since we can always reshape our character as we go, and you are truly never locked into one build type from the beginning. Similar to the Elden Ring guide, they also give a footnote spoiler that we can respec our character once we meet Rosaria in the Cathedral of the Deep. That being said, they don't really say what the best class to choose is, but they do appear to have picked the warrior class from the first couple of screenshots in the walkthrough section of the book, so we're just gonna go with that. As we progress, I decided to level Dex since we did a strength build the last two guides that we've done, and I wanted to mix it up a little, especially since they don't give you a stat to focus on. Making our way through the Cemetery of Ash, we need to take out the first batch of ghouls, then head through to the cliff's edge. The guide does mention the Ravenous Crystal Lizard, but says, if you're looking for a challenge, head that direction. If you're worried about it, skip the fight. I don't know about you, but I love me a good challenge. Let's get our ass in there. Pressing along the cliff edge, we head to our first real boss, Iudex Gundyr, or as I have said for years, Index Gundyr. I really should learn how to read. Being that he is the first boss we encounter, we don't really have a lot of options aside from dodge, attack, and heal. The guide mentions using the Battle Axe's ability Warcry, which boosts our physical damage output by 8% for 30 seconds. Aside from that, they say to try to learn his moves and to kill him before he's able to react while he's transitioning into phase 2. With Gundyr out of the way, we can head forward and place the coiled sword in the heart of Firelink Shrine. We need to introduce ourselves before heading to the next area, so run around the shrine and say what's up to all the lot lizards before we go. Once we do that, we can head to the first real area of the game, the High Wall of Lothric. High Wall is pretty linear with the few branching paths that are present, all leading to the same place. Running past the dragon, we need to kill the mimic chest under the wooden platform and retrieve the deep battle axe. This is visually identical to our battle axe, but this one is deep, which for some reason means it does dark damage. Once we take care of the minor enemies in the area, the guide shockingly says to go ahead and kill the dragon, which I personally don't think I have ever done. They say to buy a shit ton of arrows from the shrine handmade, then stand on the steps next to the dragon. From here, we can safely shoot the wing of the dragon for a few minutes, which nets us a large Titanite shard and allows us safe passage to the area below. After picking up all the loot in the area, we can go ahead and make our way across the rooftops where we are faced with a lone winged knight. This big fat fatty can be a real ass kicker at such a low level, so the guide says we can leave it for later, or we can go ahead and take it out now. The only tips they provide for attacking him now is to try to stay behind him and basically treat him as a mini boss. There's a fair bit of treasure around the area he guards, so it is certainly worth taking him out now, but you can skip him if he's giving you trouble. For me personally, when I first started playing Dark Souls, I assumed that every enemy you came across was meant to be killed right then and there. Running past enemies felt like a cheaty strategy and like I was actively going against what the game wanted me to do. So with that in mind, and once again trying to stay as new player as possible, anytime the guide mentions that something is optional, I'm gonna opt to go ahead and take it out then, as opposed to forgetting about it and never actually coming back to it. Moving forward, the guide says to preemptively enter the church and talk to Emma to get the small Lothric banner. I know that I literally just said that when they say something is optional, I'll opt to go ahead and do it, but for reasons that should be pretty obvious, I will not be taking on the dancer right now. Instead, we need to make our way down the steps and take on Vordt of the Boreal Valley. The guide recommends using the deep battle axe that we got from the earlier mimic, and the silver eagle kite shield that we got from a previous chest. With these in hand, we need to attack in small bursts and always save enough stamina to dodge his charge attacks. Other than that, the guide says to just try to time our dodges accordingly and only attack when we have an opening. It's too early to worry about having frost resistance, so this one really just comes down to skill, and with that, we are on to Undead Settlement. After a short trip on the Batwing Demon Express, we actually need to head back to High Wall of Lothric and go speak to the prisoner, Grey Rat. This little thief asks us to bring the blue tearstone ring to a woman named Loretta in the Undead Settlement. Putting on our Vadi Vidya hats, it is actually believed that Loretta is Grey Rat's mother, who is sick and or dying, which is why Grey Rat left home in the first place. In one of his mini pillaging runs, he steals the blue tearstone ring, which increases the wearer's defense when their health is below 20%. It is assumed that Loretta is sick and below 20% HP, which is why Grey Rat wanted us to bring her the ring, but unfortunately after landing in the Undead Settlement, we find the corpse of Loretta as proven by her bone, confirming that she has indeed succumbed to her illness. That is assuming her illness is getting wrapped in a sheet and hung from a 2-story building, but you know, we don't know what diseases they have in Lothric. That could be a deadly one. Grey Rat is a sweet little guy with such a tragic backstory, but I feel like that can be said for pretty much anyone in Dark Souls. I was surprised that the guide lists this quest in the main walkthrough section of the book, especially considering that almost every other NPC is locked behind the NPC chapter of the book. Whatever the case, I'm stoked they put my man in here and we get to save him for this video. Anyway, back to business. Back on the bridge, we need to meet Yol of Londor, send him back to Firelink Shrine, eat some soup, and make our way to the dilapidated bridge bonfire. From here, we need to head through the small graveyard and make our way to the boss room of the curse-rotted Greatwood. This is an optional boss, although the guide does not mention that and says to go ahead and take it out now, which we are more than capable of doing. They say to kill the undead peasants as needed, but to mainly focus on the tree's nasty egg sack things. Once we destroy a few of the tree's scrotes, he will ass blast the floor, plummeting us into the lower area of the arena. It also grows this baby arm out of its cock hole and tries to grab us and throw us across the room. It's a weird boss fight. Continuing our onslaught of the tree's tumors, the Greatwood falls and rewards us with the Transposition Kiln and the soul of the rotted Greatwood. The guide also says, before you leave, worship at the Shrine of Bones near the bonfire to acquire the Moundmaker's Covenant item. If my memory and research serve, I actually believe that we are not able to join the Moundmaker's Covenant after we defeat the Greatwood. Normally to join up, we would need to request a piggyback ride from the Hollow Manservant above, who would then transport us to the Pit of Hollows before the Greatwood destroys the floor, or ceiling, allowing us to speak to Holy Knight Aldrich prior to him getting pancaked by the tree's dumpy ass. They do mention in the first couple of pages that this guide was written using an early build of the game, so I thought that this was maybe something that FromSoftware had changed in a later build, but upon flipping to Aldrich's NPC page, they do mention being able to join via the Hollow Manservant piggyback ride fiasco. So I don't know who's to blame for this. Not to just shit on the authors for every mistake, but this does seem like something that could be very easily overlooked. Regardless, we weren't going to join up with the Moundmakers anyway, so this doesn't really affect anything, though I do want the record to show that I do know a few things. We now need to take the Transposition Kiln back to Ludlith, this tiny legless man in Firelink Shrine, who allows us to exchange boss souls for their respective boss weapons. He himself is a Lord of Cinder and is actually the only one to take his throne when the Bell of Awakening tolls. As for the other 4 lords, they'll require some persuading. Returning to the Undead Settlement, we now need to save the Pyromancer Cornix and Lady of Faith Arena of Kareem. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got him once again. Bad guide, don't you dare. Bye. Entering the large doors ahead, we are greeted by none other than the Onion Man himself, Siegfried of Katarina. And after offering to click the elevator button for him, he teleports to the top of the tower where we both gawk at this fat-ass fire demon stomping in his Air Force Ones. Ignoring his advice entirely, we march down to the square and take on the fire demon head-to-head. I guess it's more like head-to-cock, but that's head-to-head in my book, you know what I'm saying? Thankfully, Siegfried rushes in for the alley-oop, and we absolutely dunk on this kid, netting us another fire gem and an eternal friendship. After looting the small village, we need to head down the lift, take out the Boreal Outrider Knight, and make our way to the Road of Sacrifices. Here, we meet two members of the Blue Sentinel Covenant, Anor of Astora and Horus of the Basement, who we need to speak to before moving further into the swamp. Hitting the Crucifixion Woods bonfire, we need to kill the Black Knight at the end of the far corridor, then say what's up to the local nerd, Orbeck. We can now go ahead and take on the Crystal Sage, which the guide recommends busting out our best magic-resistant armor for. Aside from that and, like, dodging, the only other tip the guide provides is to take out the Sage as quickly as possible so as to not take unnecessary damage in Phase 1. For Phase 2, they say to take out the False Sages if necessary, but to mainly focus on the real one, who we can identify by the purple spells as opposed to the false ones using blue spells. With the Crystal Sage now taken care of, we should backtrack from whence we came and make our way to everyone's favorite poison swamp, Farron Keep. Here, we need to extinguish the flames from around the swamp, which will open the stone door, allowing us to progress to our first Lords of Cinder. Before doing so, however, the guide says to hit the Keep Ruins bonfire, unlock the southern shortcut for easy access, and actually take out the stray demon at the top of the lift near the Old Wolf of Farron bed and breakfast. Once this BBW is sexually satisfied, we can now head up the steps to one of my favorite bosses in the series, the Abyss Watchers. The guide says to try to get the initial Watcher to fight you with its back to the majority of the room, which will increase the odds of the rising Watchers attacking it instead of us. Other than that, and learn to dodge, that's pretty much it. For Phase 2, we face a single, beefed up Watcher who remember that he had the Carthus flame arc this whole time. This guy is fast as fuck and can really wombo combo your ass if you're not careful, so it's very important to choose a good time to attack and to heal, otherwise he'll just rock your shit. They say to try and bait his long-range lunge attack, which is way easier to dodge than his close quarters ass kickings. They say that the biggest problem with Phase 2 is the fire trail that he leaves behind, but I would argue that the hardest part for me was him flying up and crushing my skull with an 8-foot blade, but you know, maybe that's just me. All in all, the Abyss Watchers aren't too bad. You just need to know when to hold them, when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. After unlocking the entrance to the Catacombs of Carthus, they say to warp back to the Crystal Sage bonfire and make our way to the Cathedral of the Deep. Once we arrive and progress a fair bit through the area, they say to speak to Rosaria and hit her bedside chamber bonfire. This is an NPC that was briefly mentioned in the character creation, as she's the one that lets us respec our character if we did something dumb, like level faith, but there isn't really much to mention as far as the inside of the cathedral, seeing as everywhere kind of leads to the same place, so we can actually go ahead and jump to the area boss, the Deacons of the Deep. The guide says to summon Anri and Horus for this fight, and says the first stage of this battle becomes significantly easier once you understand its mechanics. They then explain to focus on the Deacons with glowing red eyes, kill that, and then back off. For Phase 2, Archdeacon Royce is summoned, who is basically the same thing, he just doesn't die in 3 hits. They recommend to combo hard, back off, heal, and repeat, followed up by, this isn't a time for finesse. You're telling me to stumble in there, exhaust myself with long combos, and have no way to get out safely? Now that's my kind of playstyle. Once the Deacons are deeked on, we can head back to the Abyss Watchers bonfire and make our way into the Catacombs of Carthus. Once inside, we need to meet up with Anri at her first rest stop, where she informs us that she and Horus have been separated, and he's taking the kids. In her search for him, we meet her again at the rock ledge near the Bone Zone, where she explains that she still has not found him, and starts to fear that the worst has happened. Funnily enough, if you peek over the ledge, you can actually see Horus standing in the Smoldering Lake alcove, but we'll get there. For now, we need to cross the bridge and enter the room at the end of the hall. In typical FromSoft fashion, we touch an artifact that will no doubt lead to pain and suffering, and get teleported to the boss room of the once great High Lord Wolnir. This is another famous gimmick boss that we cannot deal damage to through typical means. Instead, we need to destroy Wolnir's iced out rollies, which will send him back into the pit he crawled out of. Alright, the guide. I mean, yeah, they say to break his bracelets and run away if he does a stinky breath attack, but this one's pretty straightforward. Backtracking to the wooden bridge, the guide says to hit it once, which will create a ladder to the Smoldering Lake. Well, I say ladder. They say, attack the bridge a single time and wait for it to break. Make sure your health is full so the coming fall doesn't kill you. The bridge breaks after a few seconds, and then you have a good plunge. They then literally in the next paragraph say, you can climb up the damaged bridge from the bottom to return to Wolnir's bonfire. I'm not sure why they have you take the fall instead of just climbing down the ladder, but if you insist. Entering the corridors below, they say to don our best fire-resistant armor for the next mini-boss, another stray fire demon. Once again, pleasing the BBWs, we can make our way to the Smoldering Lake below after we pick up the Old Sage's Blindfold, Witch's Ring, and Black Blade from the Mimic above. Entering the Smoldering Lake, the guide says to do a suicide run, their words, not mine, and pick up all the treasure from around the mud pit. After doing so, we need to make our way to the aforementioned small alcove and fight the now hollow Horus the Hushed. There's sadly no way around this if you're doing Anri's questline, and so he must be silenced. Returning to the main lake, we must now kill the giant carthus sandworm, netting us the enchantment Lightning Stake and an undead Bones Hard. Shockingly, the guide does not mention that the ballista can be used to kill the worm, so they say to stand on this ledge and fire arrows ad nauseum. I'm not sure if they just didn't realize that the ballista could be used to damage the worm, or if this was something that maybe was added in a later version, but I highly doubt that that would be something added post area development. It very much seems like they were both placed there to use to your advantage, but we will never know because I do not care. They do mention that the ballista can be turned off, but don't mention where or how to do it before taking on the level 100 Grandmaster boss, Old Demon King. For this fight, they say to pump up our physical and fire resistance as much as you can, and to mainly use two-handed attacks since our shield will be pretty much useless against his speakers going hammer, blammer, blamer, blammer. Much like pretty much every other boss. They say to try to stay behind him and always save enough stamina to dodge an incoming attack. Aside from that, they say to try to have a low equipment load for fast rolls and to use your faster movement to your advantage. Pretty standard stuff. For phase 2, ODK uses more pyromancy spells, which are also fairly easy to dodge with a well-timed roll. They once again say to stay towards his cheeks, wail on his tail, and ball till you fall. Light it up, and GTFO the fuck out of there. With that taken care of, we can loot the rest of the area, then warp back to Wolnir's bonfire and head into Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. After rubbing elbows with the greeting party, we need to make our way across the bridge, hit the central Irithyll bonfire, scopy-dopey-doo the Pontiff Knights, and set up the area for a 1v1 with the Burning Stake Witches. After clearing out the area, they say to hit the illusionary staircase for a handy shortcut, then just basically keep trudging along to the Church of Yorshka bonfire. Here, we once again meet Anri, who gives us the Ring of the Evil Eye, which restores 30 HP for every enemy that we kill. The authors do not mention that this is a pivotal part of Anri's questline, and this will actually be the last time that we see her this playthrough, well, without a sword in her face. Continuing on, we need to make our way across the wetlands below, hit the distant Manor's bonfire, and hit the lift that brings us back to the mainland once we have looted the area. This takes us to the upper level of Central Irithyll, which allows us to take on the next boss, Pontiff Sullivan. Pontiff Sullivan is a weird boss for me because sometimes I will fight him and absolutely smoke him like a fucking blunt, and then other times, for seemingly no reason, it is I who is smoked. And I think there's a beauty in that. I feel like the first couple times I beat him, I had no issue. And then I was reading this post by someone online that had said that they had like the most trouble with Pontiff. And ever since then, he's just been way harder and I don't understand it. The guide says for phase 1 to stay as close as possible and that, quote, the key to success is putting everything into raw offense. Once he starts transitioning into phase 2, they say to wail on him as much as you can while he's down, then shift all your focus to his bunk-ass mimic tier. Other than that, they say to stay topped off on health, pile on the magic and fire resistance, and that's about it. This one really just comes down to trial and error. Once Sullivan is disposed of like the trash that he is, we can progress to Sweat City and prepare for Aldrich's edgelords to constantly invade us, stealing our souls and our bitches. Or you can just go offline. We are pro-choice here at Aquasloth HQ. Either way, just get to the top of the tower and hit the Prison Tower bonfire for safe travels in the future. We'd also smack the illusionary wall before the bonfire, which will unlock a secret room with the brass armor set and the now deceased Anri, who we can marry? I guess. This must be some weird European wedding. Returning to the tower, we need to crank that soldier boy, climb to... Was that my second soldier boy reference this video? Climb to the top and return to home sweet home, Anor Londo. Before we go balls deep at the anal rodeo, we should return to the tower, crank it to its upright and locked position, and go down to meet Captain Company Yorshka. Fuck me. And go meet Company Captain Yorshka at the bottom. We need to do this so that we... Why do we need to do this? I don't know. They say to do it, so we're doing it, alright? Actually, they're blue balling the fuck out of us. We have to go do the entire fucking Irithyll dungeon before we can go back. And that is like easily the shittiest fucking area in the game. These freaky jailer ladies drain your health to like 1 HP. There's just like weird shit around the corner. There's fucking this guy. It sucks, dude. I hate it. Hatred aside, it is a pretty straight shot through the area, and it's not nearly as long as some of the previous dungeons, so it's not that bad. They say to wear bleed and curse resistant armor and to avoid ranged combat due to the tight corridors. Other than Carla and the Dragon Torso Stone, there isn't much for us here, so we can actually go ahead and roll straight through to the Profane Capital. After hitting the Profane Capital bonfire, the guide says to go ahead and progress to the mire below, open up the fucking pit, and kill the monstrosities of sin in the building ahead. I also did not know they were named that. I thought they were just big hand guys or something. After that, loot what we can, kill the crazy man on the roof, and warp back to the bonfire. From here, use the ladder on the west side of the tower, and make our way to the raging fire below. This sanctuary of stone is home to our second Lord of Cinder, Yhorm the Giant. I'd also like to mention that in the physical book's key for this section, they say, quote, key discoveries. Siegfried helps fight Yhorm. While in the digital version, they say, key DOS-coveries. Siegfried helps fight Yhorm. You will never escape my gaze, Prima Games. This information would be super helpful if they had made any mention of Siegfried being in the well outside of the Cathedral of the Deep. But since we did not help him there, he is just gone forever. Fear not, Onion Man. I will uphold your promise. This is a boss fight similar to the likes of Rykard and Elden Ring, where we need to rush in, grab a specific weapon from the boss room, use it on the boss, and then shelve it and never touch it again. Actually, now that I think of it, Storm Ruler is like suspiciously similar to Serpent Hunter. Something worth noting is that the guide does mention running in, grabbing Storm Ruler, and then using a homeward bone to warp back to the bonfire, then equipping it there, as opposed to fumbling through the menus mid-fight. It doesn't really change anything, but I did want to mention it since it was a tip that they provided. As far as the actual battle is concerned, they don't really provide much aside from use Storm Ruler, abuse Yhorm's long recovery times, and to not be afraid to interrupt a Storm Ruler charge if it means avoiding an attack. And with that, we've got our second Lord's Ashes. This is not printed in the physical guide, but in the virtual guide, there seems to be this random addition of some screenshots of the poison statues from the Cathedral of the Deep, or just random mimic, and the pilgrim from Irithyll in like the Church of Yorska, the one by Anri. This is certainly a mistake on the author's part, but it is just kind of weird because these are kind of taken from 3 completely random pages in the book. It's not like there was one section they pulled from the Cathedral of the Deep, and then they jumped to Irithyll, and then there's the mimic from wherever. It's just odd. Anyway, on to Anor Londo. To me, Anor Londo seemed kind of more fanfare than an actual area in the game, especially considering that it's literally just the staircase and the main cathedral from Dark Souls 1. And don't get me wrong, I love its addition in Dark Souls 3. It just kind of seems a little bit like an afterthought, especially compared to other larger areas in the game. But maybe I'm just biased from the countless hours I spent farming these goddamn Silver Knights for the souvenirs of Reprisal. If you are thinking about 100% in Dark Souls 3 in 2024, just save yourself the time and don't do it, because it ain't worth it. Aside from a few key items like the Giant's Coal and an Estus Shard, there isn't much stopping us from heading to our third Lord of Cinder, Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. What a fucking bitchin' name. The guide says, quote, killing Aldrich is the easy part. Surviving Aldrich's spells long enough to finish the job is what makes the task difficult, and goddamn, could they not be more right. While his defense isn't anything to write home about, Aldrich's damage output will absolutely blow your fucking balls off. And the range of spells that he casts will give you prosthetic balls, just for them to get blown back off. They say to stick to medium to close range to avoid his bolt spell, and to dodge towards him to avoid his smaller motes. When he begins to teleport, just tank the damage until he's fully gone, then head to the opposite end of the arena where he is likely headed. And finally, when he pulls out his bow, cheese it the fuck out of there and just stay mobile to avoid his rain of arrows. To win this fight, they say to use small bursts of damage, use magic resistant armor, and to get your equipment load as low as possible to keep up the fast rolls. Shockingly, I think this is like the best guided boss fight that we've had so far, and it's nice to see them provide actionable tips as opposed to dodge, heal, good luck. But hey, with Aldrich down, we're almost done, man. We immediately get whisked away back to High Wall of Lothric, where we now need to fight the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, who we skipped previously. For phase 1, they say to try to avoid her grab attack by dodging through it, since this can deal some pretty massive deeps, and to lay into her while she's recovering from her heavier attacks. For phase 2, she pulls out the Akimbo 1887s and absolutely starts blasting our assholes. They say to hit her while she's using one-man army, but to make like a tree and get the fuck out of there as soon as she starts moving, because hot tamale does she start going a little kooky with it. To avoid her up B, they say to run backwards and just out of range, but don't mention the pillars in the room being great for cover, which I find very strange. They create perfect barriers between you and her and allow you to catch your breath, heal, and recover from her spin to wins. Once she finishes her spinning combo, run back in, start hacking and slashing, rinse and repeat, and eventually she'll go down. Hey, I'd let her go down on me, you know what I'm saying? Need me a bitch with that curve in her spine. God damn. Heading up the ladder, we now need to make our way to the Consumed King's Gardens and basically just plow straight through to the boss. Other than some useful loot we need to snag, the gardens really act as more of a transitional point to the next area in the game, the Untended Graves. The only thing that stands between us and them is Osiris, the Consumed King. What is he consumed by, you may ask? Knowledge. And fucking books. You see, back in the days of Lordran, Seath the Scaleless was fucking around, unraveling the mysteries of the universe. Typical Seath shit, and once he figured out the secret to immortality, his mind kind of started to fade. The goal that he had set to accomplish in his life had been achieved. Scared that the other lords would betray him like he did his own kind, he locked himself in his archives and slowly fell into madness. Leaving his studies in the Duke's archive, this same thirst for knowledge would lead fellow Big Brain Academy enjoyer Big Hat Logan to a similar fate of getting naked in the public library and cut down by the same sword that killed Seath. Several years and 2 sequels later, Osiris, former king of Lothric, found this research of Seath's and inevitably fell into the same pit of madness, and so he must meet the same fate as they did. For phase 1, the guide says to dodge towards him to avoid his tail and staff attacks, and to run away if he starts inhaling his poison breath. For phase 2, Osiris starts going berserk with mad dashes and claw slashes. They say to dodge to the side to avoid these attacks, and if we can manage it, hit him in the head for some extra damage. Much like the shoe company, Osiris is no match for our DCs. Our direct cuts. Yeah. Cut that out. Moving through the door at the end of the room, we need to progress down the halls to the Untended Graves. This area is a 1-for-1, albeit a little bit darker version of the Cemetery of Ash that we started this adventure in. This is also where, lore-wise, shit starts to get a little funky, but that's another topic for another day. For now, we need to make our way past all the dastardly devils and enter the arena to fight Champion Gundyr. While visually identical to Iudex Gundyr, Champion Gundyr cranks that shit up to 11 and does not fuck around even a little bit. They say to avoid long combos and just take pot shots whenever you can, especially considering that he doesn't have a phase 2 transition. They also say safe healing is probably the hardest thing to master about this encounter. This fight is more about endurance and less about dealing fat amounts of damage as quick as you can. Once Champ Gun is laid up, we need to hit the bonfire and make our way into the darkened Firelink Shrine. Here we need to grab a few items, namely the Coiled Sword Fragment, Firekeeper's Eyes, and the Hornet Ring, then roll back to Lothric Castle proper. We can pretty much roll straight through Lothric Castle, with the guide just saying to use your bow to pull enemies to 1v1 them in Rust. As far as loot goes, the guide mentions that there are a couple good armor sets, like the Armor of Prayer and the Winged Armor sets, but mainly it's just kill enemies, hit the bonfire, kill more enemies, hit the shortcut, you're at the end. They do mention that once we hit the dragon courtyard, we should hide behind the stone pillar and fire arrows at the dragon on the left before progressing to the dragon on the right. From there, it's a pretty straight shot to the next boss, Dragon Slayer Armor, which we can go take on once we loot the area and hit the shortcut back to the bonfire. For phase 1, they say to summon Egon and to basically just get the timing down for your dodges so he doesn't fucking blow your back out. Phase 2 gets a little funky with the addition of the Undead Dragon shooting his poop balls at you, and the Dragon Slayer armor busts out some lightning spells. And they say to stay topped off on health, seeing as his damage output is fucking bonkers, and that this isn't a fight heavy on theory. Move memorization is your best friend. With Dragon Slayer armor down for the count, we can now move into the Grand Archives and continue our search for the 4th Lord of Cinder. I guess 5th. Does Ludleth count? We found him already. I believe this is the first and only time they mention weapon level in the entire walkthrough, but they say to have a +9 weapon before we even enter the area, which we do have already. We need to progress as normal, looting the area and hitting any shortcuts on the way, until we eventually pop out at the top of the Grand Archives. Here, we get ganked by the Black Hand boys and girl, who the guide says we should bait out with our bow. These 3 little rascals are none other than Lion Knight Albert from back at the Vordt fight, Black Hand Kamui from Origins Unknown, and Daughter of Crystal Kriemhild from the Untended Graves. They say that Kamui and Kriemhild usually stick together, and to focus on Kamui first before fixing our attention to Kriemhild. Prince Albert can be 1v1'd once both of his teammates have been epically pwned gamer style. This did not work for me in the slightest, and after shooting my first arrow, they 3v1'd me back in the main building. I did sadly have to end up calling the ambulance here, but not for me. Once the DK crew is disbanded, we can head up the stairs and hit the lift back to the bonfire, creating a shortcut to our final Lord of Cinder, younger Prince Lothric and elder Prince Lorien. Lorien single-handedly defends his brother for phase 1, sporting an enormous greatsword that deals some mean-ass fire damage. The guide says to use our best fire and magic-resistant armors, and to stay close and only attack after each of his swings. Once we defeat Lorien, Prince Lothric comes down from his weird baby crib thing and uses his magic to resurrect his fallen brother. As if Lorien's BBC blade wasn't bad enough, Lothric now pelts us with tiny magic balls, teleports them in an instant, and resurrects Lorien anytime he falls. It's a real pain in the ass, but if we can get beside them, we can deal damage to both parties simultaneously, which speeds up the fight tremendously. Oddly enough, the guide also suggests not locking on to the princes, seeing as the camera control can get kind of weird when they start teleporting, but they do leave that option up to the player's personal preference. With Lothric and Lorien both bested, we do have the option in the game now, but, well, I assume you know where we're headed next. Our flight departs from the Irithyll dungeon once we learn the Path of the Dragon's Gesture, which we need to use in the area that overlooks the cliff towards the end of the dungeon. After doing so, we nod off and awaken at what is easily the most difficult area in Dark Souls 3, Archdragon Peak, home of the hardest boss in the game, the Ancient Wyvern. Nay, I jest. But I did want to mention again that in the digital version of the guide, they have just a random screenshot of these two hollow manservants from the Undead settlement. It's weird too because the surrounding text for these images matches that of Archdragon Peak. It's just as if like just the two pictures got swapped like reference IDs or something. It's very odd. Anyway, back to the dragon. The guide obviously says that the best way to take him out is to run the Gauntlet of Shit and take the Polar Plunge, but does also mention that you can fire arrows from the safety of the stone ledge. I must admit, I've never personally tried this, but after doing it for a few minutes, I can safely say that it fucking sucks. Just do the plunging attack. After the Wyvern's defeat, we get teleported to the Dragonkin Mausoleum, where we need to progress to another Ancient Wyvern, which is a lesser version of the boss that we just killed. From personal experience, I know that you can just run by this, but the guide does say to kill it, and notes to try to stay underneath it and hit its tail and feet for easy damage. Continuing on, we need to take out the Serpent Man Summoner, kill the Havel Impersonator, completely ignore the Great Bell, and make our way to the end of the path to retrieve the Twinkling Dragon Torso Stone. Once we do that, we can head back down the path, ring the Great Bell, and face the actual hardest boss in the game, the Nameless King. The paragraph before this boss almost reads as like this sort of caution, you're about to get your shit pushed in type of like warning, which I think is incredible. They say, quote, jump onto the fog that suffuses the area and walk through the gates when you're ready for an extremely wonderful boss fight. This is way tougher than the end boss of the game. You do not need to defeat the opponent ahead, and the only reason to do so is because they are there. And they have treasure. Entering the fog ahead, we stand toe-to-toe with the first phase mounted version, aptly named King of the Storm. The guide says to pile on fire-resistant armor for this phase, seeing as the main attack the dragon has that we need to worry about is its fire breath. They say to mainly focus on the head and neck for extra damage, and cross your fingers that it breathes fire from the ground. This gives you a good couple seconds to get some really solid hits in, and can shorten the first phase by a pretty significant margin. To quote them, the worst news is, this is the easy stage. Once we kill the King of the Storm, the Nameless King dismounts and, in true Dark Souls fashion, mourns the loss of his comrade by disintegrating it into literally non-existence, absorbing their strength and gaining the power of lightning. They recommend that we beef up our lightning resistance for phase 2 and 3, but I'm a little confused as to when they want us to do that, seeing as we go straight from needing fire resistance to lightning resistance with no downtime in between. So I just split the difference from the beginning. Rate the drip. In the next paragraph, they give what might be the most useful information that I've ever seen out of any of the 3 guides that I've read, and they say, the other way to survive is to master the timing of his 1-2 swing and his alternate 1-2-3 combo. In both cases, the early hits are quick and easy to dodge, and the final shot is slow and deceptive. If they would write something like this, covering the attack patterns of other bosses, I could see these guides being really helpful. But when they say shit like, learn to dodge and it will bring you victory, it's like, no shit, dude, I've been doing that the whole fucking game. I know that a lot of bosses are genuinely just up to move memorization and trial and error, but something as simple as the 1-2-3 combo bit can be so helpful in mastering the game, and this is the only time that anyone has ever mentioned it. Anyway, bitching aside, they say that we should always try and dodge closer to the boss and to follow up our dodges with an immediate attack. Any hesitation to do so, and you should probably just accept that you've missed your window and try again on the next dodge. Phase 3 starts when we get the Nameless King to half health, which is when he busts out a lot more of his lightning spells, which the guide describes as slow and specific with their timing. They go on to say, there aren't any tricks, you have to learn to dodge, and to punish him once he starts casting his spells. The final tip that they provide is to keep an ear out for the crackling of his lightning spells, which is the only indication as to which one he will be casting. Through many failed attempts, the Nameless King falls by our hand, and we can finally enter the area where this all began. The Kiln of the First Flame. Let's bring it home, baby. To enter the kiln, we need to return to Fireling's Shrine with the ashes of all 4 Lords of Cinder. Farron's Undead Legion, the Abyss Watchers, Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, the Reclusive Lord of the Profane Capital, Yhorm the Giant, younger Prince Lothric, the Prince of Lothric, and Ludlith, who has been there the whole time. So easily forgotten. Returning the lords to their thrones grants us access to the flameless shrine at the end of the world. Where realities collide and time stands still, we are faced with not only the final enemy of Dark Souls 3, but the final enemy of the Dark Souls trilogy, not including DLC. The physical, deific manifestation of all who have linked the fire before us, the Soul of Cinder. Soul of Cinder deals heavy fire and physical damage, so the guide recommends putting everything we can into those 2 resistances. They also say to use our embers and note that, quote, some players like to hoard them, but this is the fight that you're hoarding them to beat. It's almost like they know me. For phase 1, they say to try to learn to dodge his main melee combo, which will open plenty of windows for attacking and healing in the inevitable instance that you fuck the roll. If/when he goes mage mode is when we need to sit upright in our gamer chairs. His spells are the absolute powerhouses of the cell and will fuck your mitochondria so hard you will be forced to revert to a single cell organism. To avoid this, they say to stick to him like glue and that any distance between you and him is gonna hurt. They continue by saying, offensively, stamina is key, and that we should use any and all stamina and damage boosting items, i.e. the Chloranthy Ring. I am also kind of a pussy and refuse to use anything other than the Grass Crest shield, but you don't need to know that. Once we deplete his first health bar, he does what any sane man would do and erupts into a giant fiery ball of hot gas and hot dog water. This is when a boy becomes a man. Phase 2 begins with a bang and does not slow down until one of you is dead. He largely uses the same attacks from phase 1, but does mix it up with a couple different combos and patterns. So the guide says to heal only after a good dodge, strike lightly most of the time, and to absolutely unload if you get the chance to stagger him. Our normal setup should be dodge, get a hit or 2 in, then get out of range. They finish the fight by saying, this boss doesn't rely on gimmicks, cheap shots, or invulnerabilities. He fights fair, you just need to keep on him for a few straight minutes without dying. It's harder than it sounds, but it's also insanely fun, and I could not agree anymore. With the Soul of Cinder defeated, our plins being plonned, and our bows being bowed to bang diggy diggy, we must now link the fire, like all of those before us, and prolong this fleeting age. Until the next bell tolls, the next unkindleds rise, and the next fire fades. And only dark remains. Hey, thanks for watching, dude. I appreciate you checking it out, and I also really appreciate you sticking around to the end. This video was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun to do, and it was a pleasure to play through Dark Souls 3 again. I appreciate the support from each and every single one of you, and I hope to see you around again. If you're feeling froggy, you can subscribe and do all that YouTube shit that you already know how to do, and if you're feeling a little saucy, you can join my Xbox Live Party Discord server using the link in the description. I've been Aqua Sloth, you've been great, and I'll see you soon.